Well, hey there, thanks for joining us. In this video, we're going to discuss my top 5 favorite rock bass players. Don't go away. Well, hey, thanks for joining us, guys. This is Rock Hard Riffs. I'm going to talk about my top 5 favorite bass players. Now, we've done another video like this about lead guitar players, and I want to just remind everybody that this is not who I'm considering the quote-unquote best or anything like that, who's the most proficient. No, it's my favorites. Okay. Now, really, who are your favorites? I'm going to give you mine, so give us your top 5. Who are your favorites? Now, we know that bass players can sometimes get a bad rap. Especially on YouTube. Boy, the bass players get slammed. But I'll tell you personally, when I'm playing with other players, the sound of a band is just kind of hollow until you hear that bass come in. And then it's like, oh yeah, there it is. And I just feel more comfortable when I hear that bass come in. It's just something about it. It just makes it feel more like a complete band. It feels more musical to me. And that's going to really be kind of a reflection on who I choose for my top 5 players. So, alright guys, without further ado, let's get on. Well, number 5, that would be Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, of course, they came out of the 80s in the LA kind of punk scene, I guess you could say. But, you know, Flea really developed that slap style. And I'm not going to say I'm a huge fan of that, but he's the guy that really brought it to the fore. And that's one of the big reasons why I choose Flea as my number 5. And of course, the guy is on fire. He's an animal. He has more energy than anybody I think I've ever seen on stage. So next up, Jack Bruce from Cream. Now, Jack Bruce, as you may have or may not have known, was originally a jazz bass player. But when he got together with Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker, well, you know, he still threw that style into what they did. And you imagine singing, playing bass, and trying to keep up with Ginger Baker and Eric Clapton at the same time. Boy, he had a tall order to fill there, and he did it supremely, in my opinion. Very melodic Jack Bruce was. He was the guy that actually wrote the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, Sunshine of Your Love, that lick. That was his. So again, he's my number 4, and just a phenomenal player was Jack Bruce. Number 3, we're going to go with John Entwistle of The Who. This guy, I always thought of him as like Spider-Man. If you watch his fingers, he just looks like a great big spider crawling all over the strings. He is so fast and so loud. He has lots of strength in those fingers, in my opinion, when you watch him. He was actually originally trained on the piano and French horn before he switched to the bass guitar. Now, that's one thing about The Who, is that they are all lead players. And a lot of these bands that you think about, you know, the trios, or like trios with a singer, kind of like Led Zeppelin, that sort of thing, is that they're all kind of like lead players, if you think about it. Which takes us to number 2, and that is John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin. Now, John Paul Jones, before he joined Led Zeppelin, was already a very well-known producer and a session bassist. All over England, they knew him. He played with Donovan and Jeff Beck and Cat Stevens and many others. I think sometimes John Paul Jones is a bit overlooked just because, you know, you've got such huge personalities and talent in Led Zeppelin. But John Paul Jones definitely comes in at my number 2. Now, my number 1, this might surprise some people. They think I'm going to say Paul McCartney. And we're going to talk about Paul, but actually my number 1 is Geddy Lee from Rush. Now, Geddy Lee was a big fan of Paul, or is a big fan of Paul McCartney, believe it or not. And he says he got a lot of his melodic style taking it straight from Paul McCartney. And I just don't doubt that, because I hear it in his playing quite a bit. So again, my number 1 has got to be Geddy Lee. He's playing the bass like that and singing at the same time. That's pretty amazing. How does he do that? And again, that's another power trio in Rush. Interesting. Okay, now let's talk about Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney, again, was originally a guitar player. When Stu Sutcliffe left the band, he had to take over on bass. But Paul also was not just a guitar player and bass player, he also played the piano, he played horns, he plays everything. So I don't call Paul just a bass player. Overall, my top choice, it still remains the same. But Paul is right up, he's not like Superman, like John Entwistle or Jack Bruce or Flea. He doesn't play like that. He's a very melodic and counter-melodic player. That's what he does. And you know, an interesting fact about the Beatles is that Paul would always lay the bass lines down after they recorded everything else. So you would think that the rhythm section would record everything, the drums and bass, and then add stuff onto it there. But no, Paul would add the bass on, at least in the later years, later, after everything else was recorded. Very interesting. So again, there's my top 5 favorite bass players. Who are your favorites? Please let us know in the comments, guys. We'd really appreciate that. Alright, thanks for joining us here at Rock Hard Riffs. Make sure you just subscribe, guys, and we'll see you next video.